Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Ava McGee, and I am your MC for this evening. Throughout this whole program, you have on your seat or in your hand by now a comment card. So please, I invite you to write a comment, to share it at the end, or even a question that you have that you want to share towards the end. And we'll go ahead and get that done toward the end of our program. So is everybody ready? Yes. Awesome. All right, so I just want to welcome you now to the Women Vote Now, honoring suffragists of color who made a difference. And this program, I am so excited because we have some special things happening tonight and some special presentations from who I call our community advocates in this area. So I just honor that, and then the process that we're gonna experience tonight. So everybody ready? Ready. Awesome, awesome. So first we want to, if you're looking at your programs, we want to give a acknowledge of native lands, and this is gonna be presented by Cheryl Wapas Mays. Cheryl Wapas Mays. Welcome, Cheryl.
Twa Gwalapu Ceab de Ishid. Cheryl Wapas Mays, Tsidsta. Nakota Chud Yofti Dakota. Lustoljov Quisquo Alak. All teeth Ishidchus. Tsayof hot teeth squo alec. Dauhus Hegwad T so ab she tubus. Ot egwi tubusidchus all teeth dialop. As Hegwad tubus seed chus all teeth swatufted a teeth squashed yof teeth squaliabsh. To all of you honorable people, my name is Cheryl Wapas Mays. I am Nakota and Dakota. Gatherings of our people are medicine. This is a good gathering that honors what has been given to us. We give thanks to all of you that are here with us on the land of the Squaxin and the Squally.
Can we just take a moment to just breathe all of that in, please? Just one moment. Take a deep breath, please. Thank you so much. Now we're going to introduce our first vignette, and this is titled Untold Stories of Black Women in the Suffrage Movement, and this is by Katie Hall. And Katie Hall is an entrepreneur and a person of movement, and she is in Seattle, Washington. So this is a joy to experience. So go ahead and play, please. Thank you, Dorothy.
Welcome to the Untold Stories of Black Women in the Women's Suffrage Movement. My name is Katie Hall, and I want you to join me as we explore women such as Susan B. Anthony and the role that she played in the suffrage movement, as well as women like Ida B. Wells and Anna Julia Cooper. Ida B. Wells was an African-American investigative journalist, educator, and an early leader in the civil rights movement. She was one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She arguably became the most famous Black woman in America during a life that was centered on combating prejudice and violence. She also fought for equality for African Americans, especially women.
Ida B. Wells, she sort of like embodies everything that the suffrage movement was about, everything that rights for women and specifically about Black women were about. I mean, this is a woman who came from adversity. She lost her parents at a young age. She helped raise her siblings. But she was able to get herself educated and to make a big impact on the rights for not just black women, but women in general, and for black people in general.
Wells was born into slavery in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and freed by the Emancipation Proclamation during the American Civil War. In 1870, African American men were granted the right to vote with the ratification of the 15th Amendment. However, poll taxes, literacy tests, fear, intimidation, and later Jim Crow laws were used in former slaveholding states to keep them from exercising their right to vote. At the age of 16, Ida lost both of her parents and her infant brother in 1878 due to the yellow fever epidemic. Wells moved with some of the siblings to Memphis, Tennessee, where she found better pay as a teacher. Soon she co-owned and wrote for the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper. In the 1890s, Wells documented lynching in the United States through her indictment called Southern Horrors Lynch Laws in all of its phases. Investigating frequent claims of whites that lynchings were reserved for black criminals only, Wells exposed lynching as a barbaric practice of whites in the South used to intimidate and oppress African Americans who created economic and political competition. In a subsequent threat of loss of power for whites, a white mob destroyed her newspaper office and presses as her investigative reporting was carried nationally in black-owned newspapers. After being forced to leave Memphis because of the 1892 expose she wrote about a lynching, Ida B. Wells starts the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago, one of the first and most influential African-American suffrage groups in Illinois. The group immediately sets out to mobilize and register black men and women voters. In 1880s, black reformers began organizing their own groups. In 1896, they founded the National Association of Colored Women, which became the largest federation of local black women's clubs. Their motto was "Lifting as we climb."
22 women that did something a long time ago that were college students at the time are founders of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, of which I am a member, a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Those 22 women were college students, young women at the time, who saw the importance of the right to vote. So their first act of public service when they became an organization was marching in the Women's Suffrage March. Yes, they had to march in the back, but they were there, they were present, they were college students. And that took extreme bravery and extreme forethought, and for them to be, in their teens and 20s and leading in that way and leading the way for hundreds of thousands of women that are a part of the sorority now puts them on the top of my list as my heroes.
Stanton and fellow abolitionist Susan B. Anthony are introduced and quickly began collaborating on the women's suffrage movement. Their life work included fighting for both to end slavery and property ownership of women. Susan B. Anthony has become a controversial figure in recent years, as she is quoted saying that women deserve the vote more than black men. Stanton, too, has been criticized for her views on extending voting rights to African Americans. She echoed Anthony's resentment that black men were allowed to vote before women. The first Women's Rights Convention is held in Seneca Falls, New York, organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, who began drawing up parallels between the condition of the enslaved population and their own condition as prisoners within a patriarchal society. Women from all over the United States and abroad traveled to Washington, D.C. to participate in the march. Paul, working with Mary Church Terrell, allowed African American women to participate, but they had to march in the back of the parade. Prominent leaders like Ida B. Wells didn't agree with this decision. While she started in the back with the rest of the black women, she ran to the front once the parade began to join the women in her state's delegation. Wells was outspoken regarding her beliefs as a black female activist and faced regular public disapproval, including that of leaders with diverging viewpoints from both the civil rights movement and the women's suffrage movement. Establishing several notable women's organizations, Wells was a skilled and persuasive speaker and traveled nationally and internationally on lecture tours. Anna Julia Cooper was born a slave August 10, 1858 in North Carolina. She graduated from Oberlin College in 1884. In 1902, she was named the principal at M Street High School, and she was an educator there through 1930. At the age of 67, she received her PhD in 1925.
So I think that we have come a long ways. If you look, you will see Black women in all professions doing all kinds of things. They're working as CEOs, they're partners, they're surgeons. So we are doing a lot of things. We've come a long way. However, we still face many of the same issues that we faced, maybe not so much in 1920, but we still face issues that hold us back. We still have not broken all the way through the glass ceiling. We still are striving to do that.
Thank you for joining us as we explore the untold stories of Black women during the women's suffrage movement. My hopes as the producer of this film is that you challenge yourself to dig back into the history of the women's suffrage movement, both the told stories and the untold stories. And collectively as women, we create the future that we want for our daughters and our granddaughters. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Katie Haw.
That was awesome. I'm so proud of that film. I'm so proud. So again, this event ties in with the 2020 centennial of the 19th Amendment, the right to vote for women earned on August 26, 1920, and we wish to honor all the suffragists of color who worked courageously to support abolition and suffrage. And theirs was an intersection, race and gender, fraught with danger and bravery. We're pleased to have several of our elected officials in the House, so if you're here, can you stand or just wave? No one, no one? All right. That works too. Huh? Oh, are there potential candidates that are running for office? Oh, stand. And give us your name and what are you running for?
Malcolm Miller, Lacey City Council, position number 1.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you and welcome, Malcolm. Okay, so this evening is an educational one with short video vignettes, and also we have the pleasure of experiencing some awesome poems and presentations, which I am sure you're gonna love. You're gonna absolutely love. And so from now, we are going to introduce our next person, which this person is like near and dear to my heart. She's such an awesome human being, and I love her very, very much. And it's Dr. Johnson. Step on up, please. Dr. Karen Johnson. She's gonna present to us our first vignette, and this is Sojourner Truth, so please enjoy.
Well, chillin', there's just so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here they're talking about? That man over there says a woman needs to be helped in the carriages and lifted over puddles and have to have the best place everywhere. Well, nobody ever helps me into a carriage or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered in the barns, and no man could beat me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as hard and eat as much as a man when I could get it and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most of them sold off to slavery. And when I cried out in my mother's grief, none heard me but Jesus. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Yeah, that's it, honey, intellect. Well, what's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my full little measure full? Then that little man in the back over there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where'd your Christ come from? He came from God and a woman, and then a man had nothing to do with it. And if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn this world upside down all alone, then these women's here together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it, and the men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say.
Awesome sauce. That was awesome. I just want to remind you, the suffrage is a struggle itself, and it's a call to action. And so everyone can leave with ideas and what they can literally basically take action in after they leave here and find basically what your mutual goals are of equality and democracy. And also in your program, there are bios in the back that gives you a description of every single person that was involved with the women's suffragist movement. And just take a look at that for yourselves and just know that there are so many things that can be done. There are so many things that were done, as you see in the past, to get to where we are right now. However, there are more things that need to be done in our future to get where we really want to be. And that is based on inclusion and equity. So I just want you to consider that. So our next presenter is Talana Reed. And Talana will do a poem from Frances E. W. Harper. And after that, we'll have a vignette on Mabel Lee. So Talana.
Got some moves there. So first I'll start off by speaking a little bit about Frances E. Harper. Frances E. W. Harper, she lived from 1825 to 1911. She was 86 years old when she died, was one of the most successful African-American writers of the 19th century, with many poems, novels, essays, and short stories to her credit. She was one of the most liberal contributors as well as ablest advocates of the Underground Railroad and of the slave. She was active in the causes of abolitionism, suffrage, and African American rights her entire life. Harper was a highly regarded poet, bridging the gap between the first Black African American poet, Phyllis Wheatley, in the 18th century, and the celebrated Black poet Paul Laurence Dunbar in the late 19th. She began her first set of poems, Forest Leaves, when she was only 20 years old. In spite of the fact that it sold thousands of copies, there are no copies around. Fortunately, most of her poems still do exist in readers such as Brighter Day Coming. The 1853 publication of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin had a profound effect on Harper, as did it on many African Americans and writers. The book moved her to write at least 3 more poems, all of them being published in abolitionist journals that year. That was Eliza Harris, To Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Eve's Farewell, Eliza Harris. Excuse me. Harper was also active as a teacher, a speaker, and when she gave up on teaching, Harper moved to Philadelphia, where she lived in the home of William Still. His home was the Underground Railroad station. She learned firsthand from slaves the horrors of slavery directly from them and began to internalize it. Later that year, she moved to a hotbed of fugitives where she began her speaking career with lectures. Women were still not easily accepted as public speakers, but her path was not as hard, for her, so to speak, as previous generations because of her middle-class education, so they say. Harper's dignified and well-spoken manner made her acceptable to many whites as well as blacks, though she was often described as demure and ladylike. She was a fiery speaker, and her grueling lectures spoke volumes to many. Harper was considered an eloquent speaker and frequently used the imagery of her poems in her speeches. And this evening, I'm gonna sing for you, Bury Me in a Free Land. Make me a grave wherever you will, in a lonely plain or a lofty hill. Make it among earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves. I could not rest if around my grave I heard the steps of a trembling slave. His shadow above my silent tomb would make it a place of fearful gloom. I could not sleep if I saw the lash drinking her blood of each fearful gash, and I saw her babes torn from her breast like trembling doves from their parents' nest. I'd shudder and start if I heard the bay, a bloodhound seizing their human prey. I heard the captives plead in vain as they bound afresh his galling chain. If I saw the girls from their mother's arms, battered and sold for their youthful charms, my eye would flash with a mournful flame, the death-pale cheek grow red with shame. I would sleep, dear friends, where bloated might can rob no man of his dearest right. My rest shall be calm in any grave, where none can call his brother a slave. I ask no monument, proud and high, to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves. And really, the emotion that I expressed, as lyrically wrong as it may sound or seem to anybody, that this is not a happy poem. It's full of emotion, and I'm going to tie it to its relevance now. And basically, Frances E. Harper had 2 different themes going on in this poem. Where none can call his brother a slave, and may rest shall be calm in any grave. The 2 key themes in the poem are injustice and death, with the poet using a motif of herself still suffering in her grave as an expression of the fact that as long as there is injustice and slavery, even in death, she will not be rest-free. And My emotion changed in the tempo because that's how I feel today. That's as a Black woman, as an activist, as an entrepreneur, and as a mother, we're not free. And the poet emphasizes that her request that her relatives bury me not in a land of slave is not such a lofty one. She asks no monument and cares not for her grave is only a lowly plain or among earth's humblest graves. The plea that her grave be not trodden upon by a trembling slave or coffle gang is actually very humble. It is a very humble one in itself. The request for an end to slavery should not be perceived as lofty. Although it's true that most slaves associated death with peace and freedom from earthly toils, their burden as slaves, Harper makes it clear that the mere fact that her body still is in the land of slave poses a problem. The slave's life of pain can never be felt by non-slaves. And all we can do is sympathize with those degrading times in history and make sure it doesn't happen again. It's not that easy. I must say that modern day slavery still does exist. Here in America, we have sex trafficking, many, many, many more human rights violations. Have we failed? How do we sleep at night, knowing that genocide raging in the deep forests of Congo? What I can say breaks my heart right in two is that I'm a slave, my daughter's still a slave. And as you know, it's not, I don't embrace that. I endure it. I fight through it, just like these women did. Frances E. Harper, they fought through it. And despite her background from the others, they're all one and the same. They're Black women. They're survivors. They are warriors. And they paved the way for you guys and us. We can end it if we just remember and educate ourselves and don't walk fearful of the past, that it will repeat itself because it's already repeating itself, but walk proudly in the fact that we have something to do as women with the change ultimately. We need to vote, we need to support one another, and we need to hold each other's arms up during all these times. It's a celebration. This is amazing. We've accomplished a lot. Just continue to hold each other's arms up. That's all I have.
Yep, courageous and brave is what we have to be. So our next vignette is on the Chinese immigrant. And this is by Dr. Mabel Lee, and segue to problems of different voter access for immigrants from different cultures and lands. So you can go ahead and play. So right now, we have our comment cards. Did anybody fill out a comment card? Want to go grab them? There's one in the back. All right, so the first comment card is a question, and I hope I'm reading this correctly. It says, how can we share the lives of those we are less familiar with who might help? So can anyone answer that question? How can we share the lives of those we are less familiar with who might help? No one? All right, so I can offer a suggestion. When you are not familiar with a thing or a circumstance or a person or a place or however that looks, we are like in the 21st century. We have a phone, right? We can Google anything on this thing. So that's the first step, to Google. So if it's a famous person or process, we have Google. And if it's a person that's sitting in our neighborhood or in our communities, show up don't stalk the person. Just show up where you think that person is, or figure out how you can contact that person. Because I think community is necessary, and familiarity with a process or activity that's going to better our community. I think you have a better chance of figuring out, for one, who, the who, what, where of things, and just be open enough to step outside of your comfort zone. Contact them. Give them a phone call. Say, hey, I'm so-and-so. I heard you do this, or you're about this. How can I help? Or can we have coffee? Can we sit down? Can we have a conversation? I mean, it's simple. I think it's simple. So is that a good suggestion for someone who's willing to kind of step outside of their comfort zone and be willing to meet with someone and have an opportunity to get more familiarized with that person or that process, and being able to put themselves forward and being actionable in that?
Somebody on the end that has comments.
Yes.
I would say, like, but if it includes their culture, like, I would ask them about it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't, like, jump into.
Conclusion. Okay. Thank you. So did everybody hear that? She can repeat it.
Okay. I was gonna say that if it includes the person's culture or what they're about, I would ask them personally rather than learning about it than making assumptions on what they do.
Right. Thank you. And that comes with community and building relationships. Like, I can't step to you and ask you a crazy question or something I wouldn't ask a person that I know. Because sometimes people want to know about other people and they don't know what question to ask. Build relationships. There's nothing wrong with building relationships. I think that's the best thing to do, is build a relationship. Have someone. So when I walk into this building, I always feel welcome because I know half of the people in here. And so for me, it's like building relationships. Exactly, Dorothy, yes. So building relationships is the ultimate thing. Never be afraid of building a relationship, because you never know where that relationship can take you. It can take you into a blissful situation, and then also can take you into an educational situation. And we're human beings, so we need to learn every day. So just remember that, okay? Yes.
I was just going to say, several years ago, I was at a conference with a friend of mine in Portland where Shirley Chisholm was the keynote speaker, and she was great. She's one of my heroes from years ago, but she was talking about having the black people in the group. It was the Blacks in Public Service is what I was at. And she was advising all of them to do exactly what is happening here, and have little announcements in the paper, advertisements, and getting on TVW and this system here. And it's just being more open and verbal and getting the point across and bringing out names, because some of the names here I didn't recognize, but I do follow some of them. But it's just getting the word out and starting with groups like this.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else want to share?
Anyone else?
Before I go to the next one? And I have my glasses on, and just bear with me. It says, I was Okay, so this is from Mary.
Do you want me to read it?
Could you, please? Thank you.
I was disappointed not to see more Black women at this event.
Oh, okay.
And
Me too, me too,
May I
me too, yes.
address that,
Yeah, you can.
Ava? Thank you. My name's Carolyn, and I was one of the planners for this event. I am thrilled that you are all here. I would be beyond thrilled if we had more people of color here, men and women. I had two very dear friends who are now deceased. They were both Black women. You may know them because they were active in the community. Cora Pinson and Princess Jackson Smith. I mourn their loss. I'm retired. I am active in my church. I'm active with several groups in the community. I move around a lot in the area here of Thurston County. But most of the people that I encounter are not people of color. I'm very accepting, I think, of diversity, and I cherish equality. So I would like to invite each of you to connect with others in whatever way we can so that we will have unity in our community. It's very important. I am thrilled that you are here, and I thank you for the opportunity of sharing my thoughts with you.
All right. Yes, that's okay, that's all right.
Anybody else?
Thank you. Thank you for that. So another segue to that. Marketing is important. And marketing to people who you want to be at events like this who don't look like you is to get in touch with people who look like me or, yeah. And so just keep that in mind. I'm always open to that. So, yeah. Because I posted it on the Black Alliance of Thurston County. I posted it on my personal site and also my Facebook page. So, yeah. So just keep in mind, and for anybody who knew they were going to come too, it's always good to just reach out to other people. Yeah, don't be afraid. It's okay. We love each other. All right. The next query is: do you or other members of your organization guest speaker at other events and venues? Yes. I'm a public school teacher looking for community resources to engage students in conversations of equity and agency. I'm more than welcome to do that. And we have, I'm not gonna throw, you are too? Awesome. And then I have this special person that's sitting in the audience, and I know she would be open to doing that also, Dr. Thelma Jackson. Yes, thank you. See? Yes, see? Yep. So we're all available for that. So at the end, we can have that conversation. You can give us your contact information, and we'll work out the rest. All right?
Yay, resources.
Awesome. Yes, exactly. All right. So that was the last one for now. And so at this time, it's 7:18. Got the questions, and then we're going to the voter accessibility variations. Yes. All right. And you're doing that, Madame? Awesome sauce, thank you.
Okay. As I said in the welcoming, I am Nakota and Dakota. My people are the Assiniboine from what is now Fort Peck, Montana, and the Sisseton Wahpeton people who were at one time in Minnesota. So I just kind of wanted to, because as Native people, we always have to introduce ourselves and tell who we are. And if I did it in a real traditional way, we would be here because I would have to introduce my mother, my grandmother, my great-grand, and on and on and on. You know, so that can take a while. So I just wanted to kind of do that in a semi-traditional way. So I would like to share with you a little bit about voter suppression as it happened in North Dakota that we all heard about last year, and maybe a little bit of history before I talk about my experience in North Dakota. So our Native communities have been led by Native women since time immemorial. But the history of colonial patriarchy makes everyone believe that our women were invisible. Look at the times when treaties were signed. The government only invited the men who appeared to be leaders, and the natives must have been horrified that the decision makers were not invited. We, the women, made final decisions. For the most part, our people were matrilineal, and I wish I could say we still are. Even today, in any tribal community, you will see Native women at the forefront where there is work to be done. In the 1960s, women like Ramona Bennett at the Puyallup tribe helped lead the battle to regain Puyallup land and fight for the right to fish. For years, Winona LaDuke, White Earth Ojibwe, has been leading a battle to protect our Mother Earth from the polluters of our environment. Standing Rock was another example of our women taking the lead. And most recently, women are on the forefront to fight for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So why were Native women excluded from getting in the 1919 landmark celebration of women getting the vote? For the same reason our men who fought in World War I could not vote. Not until the Snyder Act of 1924, also known as the Indian Citizenship Act, was passed. So why now? Because there were no segregated Indian units as there were for African Americans. Some members of the white society, and I quote, declared that the Indians had successfully passed the assimilation test during wartime and thus they deserved the rewards of citizenship. You have no idea how many times our ancestors were put through their tests of assimilation. So now we have the right to vote. Unfortunately, many times when people of color are given a right, someone pops up with ways to suppress those rights. We've seen plenty of that aimed at our Black sisters and brothers before, during, and since the Civil Rights Movement. Here in Washington State, Senator John McCoy from Tulalip sponsored a Washington Voting Rights Act, which Governor Jay Inslee signed into law. I was fortunate enough to be able to testify on this act to share my experience in working with the Turtle Mountain Chippewa people last year when the state of North Dakota was attempting to keep tribes in that state from being able to vote simply based on the fact that they didn't have a street address. They had P.O. boxes. If you've ever been to an isolated reservation outside of the village or the town, there are no streets. There are roads, and the U.S. mail does not deliver to these places, so nearly everyone has a P.O. box. So last year, Gilda Yazzie, past vice president of NOW and Navajo Nation member, and I were asked to go to North Dakota to help with the Native voters. I tried contacting different tribes, and through my Chippewa friend here in Olympia, I was able to connect with Heidi Heidkamp's campaign manager in Fargo and the Turtle Mountain Chippewa contact for her campaign there. We were invited to come and help out in any capacity that they needed us to fill. There were 2 events for Heidi where we helped set up and tear down. There were opportunities for us to doorbell, phone bank, and assist with voter registration. But the most exciting event took place on Election Day. After a morning of phone banking during a mini blizzard, we rode to the high school with our new friend Denise, where they served us lunch, and afterward we mobilized with high school and college students in a march from the high school to the voting polls, about a mile, in a mini blizzard, as Denise called it. Wind chill was about 20 below zero. and I was bundled up in Denise's 20 below full-length down coat, and Gilda was wrapped in a down comforter. We were surprisingly comfortable, but the exhaustion of the frigid air on our lungs caused us to give up just mere yards from the polling center. And there were cars to assist us, and we rode the rest of the way. There was a huge turnout of Native voters in North Dakota last year on the reservations as they took matters in their own hands by way of sovereign rights. Unfortunately, the discriminatory voter ID law is still in effect, so we'll have to see how this plays out in the 2019 election. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now we have our next presenter, Mary Hall.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm your county auditor, Mary Hall, and it's very great to be here tonight. You know, even before I got into elections, I was passionate about getting people to vote. When I was in my 20s and people would ask me what I would do if I won the lottery, I told them I'd quit my job, I'd start a nonprofit to make sure everybody got registered and voted. So I was the kind of person that in my 20s, I not only watched C-SPAN, I called into C-SPAN. Serious story. So when I was hired as an election administrator in Pierce County in 1996, I was finally able to put my ideals into action. I made sure that my team was very much into customer service, making sure that both voters and candidates had the easiest path possible. And I'll never forget, there was a presidential election, and I was actually doing the phone bank, relieving people for dinner, and got a call from a voter who had lost their ballot, had no transportation, had no access to technology, so they couldn't download a ballot. So I had this real dilemma: how do I get this person the ability to vote? So what I did is I pulled them up on the computer, pulled up their precinct, said, grab a piece of paper, I'm gonna read the candidates on your ballot, write their names, don't tell me who you're voting for. So I went through all of the races. They wrote who they wanted to vote for on the piece of paper, but they also had to return a voter declaration or the ballot wouldn't count. So they grabbed a piece of paper. I slowly read the ballot declaration. They signed it at the end, put it in an envelope. I told them our address, put voted ballot on the outside, and they were able to vote in that election because they were just a couple blocks from a drop box. So, I mean, I will do whatever it takes to get people the right to vote. So when I was elected Thurston County Auditor, I promised that I would fight for same-day voter registration, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds in the Voting Rights Act. In fact, that's one of the reasons I ran, because I was the administrator who used to review the legislation, and the auditors used to say, no, we can't do that, no, we can't do that, and I know we could. So I wanted to be at the table. So, but back then, when I was elected, I was the single auditor out of 39 counties that supported same-day voter registration and pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. So both tools take away the barriers for voters, right? It's the same way that good customer service, being able to use a piece of paper to use a handwritten ballot, empowers people to vote. So after working for 5 years, convincing one auditor at a time, I finally got 8 auditors to agree to support same-day voter registration, pre-registration in the Voting Rights Act. And fortunately, they were the larger counties, so it was most of the population in the state. So we actually got her done. That was probably my biggest accomplishment. Thank you. But we're here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of our right to vote. But I think it's important, and you mentioned it earlier, we have to acknowledge that voting rights for non-white women and Native Americans took much, much longer. And we're still fighting those same battles today, which is unbelievable. But I want to tie my experience back to the history of women's suffrage here in the county where I administer elections. You know, it was 1984 when the Washington Territory was founded, and only white men 21 years of age could vote. But in 1867, the legislature removed the word male from the voting requirements. So that didn't explicitly allow women to vote. It was really dependent on the local election official at the polling site to determine whether they were going to count the ballot or not. So in 1870, 50 years before the passage of the 19th Amendment, 15 women in Thurston County were the very first women to ever vote and have their vote counted in Washington Territory. So go Thurston County, right? So, but this is interesting. It was the poll workers at Grand Mound and Little Rock that accepted the votes. The female voters in Olympia were turned away from the polls. Yeah. So why were they accepted in South County but suppressed in Olympia? I guess it was a different day, right? But you know, the real point is that the laws were very vague. It was up to the interpretation of each election official. And then, of course, the next year, the legislature clarified the language and took away explicitly the right for women to vote. So it took another 40 years for women to gain the right, and 10 years after that, the entire nation. So I've got to say, that makes the 5 years I spent pushing that same-day voter registration ball uphill seem like nothing. So this was very enlightening to me. So I'll be a little more patient with the next, leading-edge legislation. But here's the lesson that I take from this experience and this story. Good election officials matter. We elect the person that runs elections here, so the position is important, and you need to watch our work because what we do matters. Are we breaking down barriers or setting them up? So, after my time in this office, I think those are going to be very important questions that you ask the new people that are looking to hold this office. And ask pointed questions and make sure you get to the answer. And also, good laws are important. The law in 1870 was too vague, allowed too much interpretation. And I'll tell you, we election administrators do not like shades of gray. We want it to be spelled out clearly. But this is why we worked so hard to pass the democracy package last year. And it wasn't just that we passed the laws, we passed very good laws that everyone can understand and follow. And I speak a lot around the country on panels about vote by mail, and we're really trying to push this out, be a leader in the country to put the laws we have in effect in the rest of the country. So anyway, that's all I have today. Thank you very much for having me, and I would be happy to answer any questions during the break. Could I talk a little bit about what we're doing for voter engagement? Do I have any minutes left? Okay. So since these laws have passed, it's been really fun, and Senator Hunt, bless his soul, actually gave us some money last year to do voter outreach. Amazingly enough, some counties actually gave the money back to the Secretary of State's office. Clark County did. I can't believe it. I got $14,000, and I'm so grateful for that money. So we are doing things like we're printing up postcards. I hired a bunch of high school kids. We're out at all the festivals, doing our future voter program, getting people to pre-register. And we're taking little postcards along with us where they actually write themselves a note. I will vote for the first time. They put the date in there when they're going to be 18. I'm going to vote because, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to celebrate in this way. They address it to themselves. We take the cards back, and we're going to mail them out to the voters when they turn 18. So we're also trying to get into all the high schools with a future voter program. So if you know any high school kids that are really passionate about voting, we want to actually have them be the ambassadors in their own schools, and we will give them the tools. SPSCC has agreed to partner with us and sponsor this program, so now we just need really energized kids in all of the high schools. We've got a few. This is a program we're building on, and I would really love to see it up and going strong next year for the presidential election year. I don't know if anybody saw on Facebook or got a postcard that we mailed out, but candidates and campaigns mail to people who vote all the time because they want them to vote for them. But nobody really reaches out to the people who don't vote. So I chose to do that this year. And for people under 30, we sent out a postcard that had, a beautiful, senior couple sitting there, happy, saying, if you don't vote, we'll continue to make your decisions for you. So that received tremendous response. So we're actually going to make that into posters and put it in colleges and high schools across the county. So that's great. We'll be doing some homeless outreach next year as well, working with some of the community shelters to see if they would act as a place where people can receive their ballot. So the homeless community, when we mail out ballots, will know to get it there. If they can't do that, we're going to be working with the libraries, Timberland Library, and the librarians will be able to actually assist voters on election day because it's same-day registration, right? And I can designate locations across the county, so I am designating the libraries to be a location. So people can come in there, they can register to vote at the kiosk. They do need to call us because we'll have to activate that registration. But then they'll be able to actually download a ballot packet, their exact ballot packet, or go online and have it mark it and, mail it back to us, put it in a drop box. So we're hoping that that is really going to improve access for those folks that don't usually have an opportunity to get to vote. So we're really excited about that. We'll be piloting that this November. So excited about that. What else? And we'll be in all the movie theaters, having like 15-second spots. It's a shotgun approach, but that's exactly who we want to hit, right? So we're always open to suggestions. We hope to work very closely with the League of Women Voters and any other organizations that are engaged in voter registration. I would love to come and talk to the Black Collective and see how we can get African American youth involved and engaged in the process, as well as the Native American community. I put a drop box on the Squally Reservation last year, and it's our lowest turnout box. And everybody votes in the tribal elections, so I would really love some help on how we can motivate them to get involved because, their vote is powerful as well. So, sure.
On the Navajo reservation,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering if that could possibly be passed on to different tribal council people around Washington, but in Navajo country, they do their tribal elections on national election days.
That would be
So
awesome.
in one building, in the different communities, you go in and you do your tribal election, and then you go across the street to another building or a for those of who didn't hear me, in Navajo country, they, in the different communities, they set up two separate places, and they do it on the days of when they or on National Election Day is when they do their tribal elections, so they get more people to come in and do the national election. So it's been very successful. My friend Gilda shared that with me.
So that would be something to talk to Senator McCoy about?
I think so. I know him.
I went to Japan with him. He's a wonderful guy. Are there any other questions? So it's really, sure.
Just a minute here.
As a voter, particularly for local elections, is it on?
Yes.
Okay. Particularly for local elections, I find it hard to get well educated about the candidates. And I think it's wonderful that you send out the voter pamphlet, and I always look through that. But so often they sound very similar, and it's buzzwords, and it's hard to know who they are behind those words. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts. I do attend candidates forums when I can and that kind of thing, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts about how voters can become better educated in making their choices. If I don't know a candidate, I don't know the candidates, I just don't vote for those. And that does feel like it's kind of a cop-out, but I don't know what else to do.
No, that's actually, I hear that a lot from people. And So I've been trying to think, I mean, the voter pamphlet statements are written by the candidates themselves, and we always include their website and encourage people to go there. But I've been talking with my voter outreach folks of how can we put something in the voter pamphlet that will direct people of how to get more information. I mean, it's hard because you have to go where the candidates are, really. And I encourage people, pick up the phone and call them if you have specific questions or specific issues that are important to you. Call the candidate and ask them. I mean, I always put my phone number in the pamphlet when I'm on the ballot, and I'm always open to talking to folks.
Mary?
Yes.
Mary? The League of Women Voters sponsors a site called vote411.org. Write that down. vote411.org. It's a very good alternative site to find out about the various candidates.
That is a great site.
I'm
going to grab my
Herndon.
water real quick, but I'll listen. Hang on.
I'd like to add to that comment of Mary's. If you go to vote411.org and you put, first place, you can register to vote there, very simply. And secondly, if you put in your address, your voting address, your mailing address, it will take you to a ballot type of information which lists all the candidates and ballot measures that you will be able to vote on. Now, it's only activated a few weeks before the election, so you wouldn't find it now. But candidates are given a bunch of questions, but they answer it in their own words, and there's a lot of questions. Furthermore, some candidates don't answer, which tells you a lot. And so I encourage you to take advantage of that site, as well as paying attention to the YouTube forums that we'll have posted after September 28. We'll have the televised forums with Thurston Community Media. Thank you, thank you. And we'll also have a public forum for the port candidates on September 30 right here in this very building. And so we encourage you to come. You can go to lwvthurston.org and look under upcoming events, and you'll find all of these things. So we encourage you to take advantage of those things.
Excuse me. So I'm active in political measures and candidates and all that. But one of the greatest sources that I use is to go to the county database of all the people that are running, throughout your county. And they'll have contact information there. And they love it when you give them a call and ask them specific questions, especially if you're confused about something or the person has not answered the question that you have. They're very forthcoming. Or, you can go to your local political party of your choice, and they will all have local to you candidate forums. And they even often they will have their endorsement meetings open to anyone who wants to come, where they will interview all of the candidates for a particular position, and that will give you the opportunity to learn more about them. But it's all online, and usually if you can't find it online, or you're not a person who goes online, you can get a phone number to call them and talk to them.
We'll take 2 more questions. Jennifer? Okay, 1 more question. Rita?
I just was going to add, get involved with the political party of your choice. Then you know these people who want to be leaders, and you follow them through the years. So that's one way to get to. I always know who to vote for because, I've been involved in the league and know some of these people. So that's one good way to know who to vote for.
Great.
I think we're about ready for a break.
Okay. So just in closing, I would like to share kind of my vision of what I really think elections need to be. I've been doing this work for 23 years, and the election industry has really been very process-driven, and we do it well. I mean, we are process-driven, we are perfectionists, the rules are tight, our procedures are tight, but we don't focus on voters. And I really think moving into the future, we need to look at elections as a more voter-centric process and really invest in voter engagement. And to do that, we're really going to need to have help from our legislators. And this is a little known fact, but the state legislature doesn't pay their share of election costs. So every city, town, fire district, school district that puts candidates on the ballot pays a prorated share to the county for conducting those elections. However, in even years, when the president is on the ballot, when the congressional candidates are on the ballot, statewide offices, House races, Senate races, the county picks up the entire tab for the state. You know, we've in the past just said, you know, you need to fund our elections, you need to fund our elections, but I'm ready to say, okay, let's meet us halfway. Let us start working on voter-centric elections so we can really get serious about empowering our citizens to engage in the voting process. So if you have a senator friend or a representative friend or anybody like that, we could sure use your help. And I really think that we've got to get to that next step. So if you're wondering what I'm going to be up to in the future, that's my sole number one thing. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for that. I know when I saw that ad, I was like, oh no. I actually said, oh no. So anyway, it works. Advertisement works. So I have 3 more questions or comments that I'm going to read before we go out on our break. And so the first one is missing Native American women. Can someone comment on that? And we can, yeah. Go ahead.
The horror of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and actually has been transferred as well to men and children, has plagued this country for such a long time, and not only the United States, but Canada. Canada started the movement on bringing this thing to light. And I got involved in it last year. Yeah. Last year I got involved in it with a woman here in Olympia. Her name is Kyle Lucas. Yeah, Kyle Lucas. Why? I know her really well and I blanks. Okay, and we've done some events and things together along with other people in the area, and basically what we do is try to educate the public of, you know, what is going on and who is missing, and to get help in getting that out. Recently, our most recent really huge event was the unveiling of a semi-truck featuring Alyssa McLemore, who has been missing for many, many years, and working with the State Patrol. I testified, I believe, 4 times for missing and murdered Indigenous women. Twice I testified against 1713, and many people were kind of shocked that I, a Native American woman, would testify against a bill that was meant to help my people. But it had gaping holes, it had missing pieces, and between Kyle and other activists, one woman from Yakima, Roxanne White, another woman from up north who goes by Snohomish Sladite, meaning Sladite means lady or woman, and a host of other people that we've worked together to bring this to light. It's hard work, and we've barely touched the tip of the iceberg, but this bill, Kyle and I had lunch with the senator who from the Yakima area who had sponsored the bill, and with the State Patrol liaison, and talked to them and voiced our concerns, and a few of the things that we wanted, because as they said, you can't put too much in the bill or you're going to kill the bill. So what we felt was the most important things did get in there, which was to make sure that there was a database that would collect all of this information, and that the 2 liaisons from the State Patrol would be trained to work with the Native peoples, one in Eastern Washington, one in Western Washington. Again, it's not perfect, but it's a start. And so we could really use a lot of help. Thank you.
So, question before you sit down. So when you say we can use a lot of help, what does that look like?
Social media. When you see things on social media about that, spread the word. There's a lot out there on missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's like this semi-truck that is traveling around the country. People are going to see that. If you see something posted on a billboard somewhere about a missing Native woman, and you know what? Let's just say anyone of any race, because there are huge numbers of Black women who are missing, and children and men. And so let's go with all races. When you see those things, take pictures of it, post it, get it out there. Somebody has got to see these people if they're still alive.
Thank you.
So social media is our friend sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Thank you. All right. Does that satisfy your question? Whoever asked that? Okay, awesome. And my next question is, we never got the Equal Rights Amendment passed in this country. Why not? Anybody want to step in for that?
We have one state to go, and we're hoping that it will pass. And one way that we can encourage people is to get them out to vote everywhere. And it's the state of Virginia. Is that the last state?
There's many states, but Virginia, we have the best chance. And if you can come down to Virginia or make phone calls to Virginia this October, what we're trying to do is get women elected there so that come next session, we can get the ERA out of there. And we'll have it, it'll go to Congress again. So
awesome.
come to Virginia, find a way to, you can contact Cheryl and we'll help you get a hold of, if you want to make phone calls from here, that will help. She and I and China are going down there in October to knock on doors.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one more. This question's asked, why did we allow positions in this county to be such long terms, especially coroner and prosecutor sheriff? Yes. Prosecutor sheriff. How do we change this? And this is stemmed from white men monopolizing positions for too long.
Well, they're 4-year terms, just like mine is. But I think what I'm hearing is they're institutionalized in that person holding office. Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is people stepping up to run and really organizing ahead of time and getting the support before you make that decision and make sure that you can go into the race with a lot of momentum. I would love to see women in both those positions.
Okay. Did you have your hand up?
Are there term limits?
Term limits?
There are no term limits.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, however, one of the things you have to keep in mind is they're not policy positions. I mean, maybe the sheriff, well, I don't know, those two a little more, but I guess I look at my job and I'm over county finance and recording and licensing and passports and elections. So it took me a while to learn all those aspects, even though I had I went to school for accounting and ran an imaging and document management software for recording and worked in elections for 23 years. But, it's just been the last few years that I've really felt like I've got my feet solidly on the ground. But if you don't think they're doing the job, then it's recruiting people and, and running for office.
I'll comment that I work for several elected officials, and the people I work for have always been open to the public, and they appreciate your input and your comments. So keep in touch. You may rile them, and they may not answer your email right away, but keep in touch and let them know what your concerns are and what you would like them to do about that.
And what I notice about term limit talk, it's usually about somebody else's person who should be term limit. We tend to like our person, but we think like Mitch McConnell should have term limits. We actually, then if you turn it around and say, what about our senators? Should we have term limits for them? Our answer is usually no. So I think, we do have term limits. If we don't like what people are doing, we have people run against them and we vote.
So question, so is that a policy or practice that needs to be changed if that's the case? It's law? Okay.
Okay, we ready for a break?
I think so. So we're gonna go into a break. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Our next speaker is going to touch on lessons from the suffrage struggle. And she also has a PowerPoint presentation on struggle to gain the vote. And she is in costume. Woo-hoo. Enjoy.
There are lots of lessons we can learn from the struggle to win the vote for women, and this could be a whole evening in of itself. I've chosen 3 things that have application to our struggles today, whether it's the ERA, immigration rights, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ rights, reproductive justice, or any of the myriad other social justice and environmental issues that are on our plates. Many tactics were used in the suffrage effort, like speaking tours of the media work of the day, house and church meetings, public events like parades and picketing, and even attempts to vote illegally and legally, as was pointed out here in Thurston County. Their context, the national political situation in which the actions took place, had a huge influence on their outcome. There are 3 elements to note here, and they bring our goal of honoring suffragists, women of color, which is what we're here tonight to celebrate. These are political strategy, solidarity, and individual action. The first Women's Rights Convention calling for women's vote was credited to Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. And the only Black person there was Frederick Douglass, who was a man. And he was the only one, or the first one at that convention, to call for the women's vote. Many states and territories in the West had granted women the vote as their lands were taken away from Native peoples and opened up to non-Native settlers. Geography and the scarcity of numbers often determined people's ability to make their farms work, make their businesses work, and women were needed in a much more stark way in the West than they were in the East. So some states gave full voting rights and some states gave partial rights. There were successes over time, but it was pretty erratic around the country. In 1866, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony formed the American Equal Rights Association that was an organization dedicated to the goal of suffrage for all, regardless of gender or race. But simultaneously, with suffrage, another complexity was developing. Following the Civil War, the Republicans were concerned that Black civil rights were being even further eroded, because in the South they were enacting laws to keep the now free black citizens limited, especially in business and in their community, so they'd be no competition for the white businesses, and they'd be as dependent as possible on the white planters. These black codes were enforced with local instances of terror through lynching and murder and other ways. So in 1868, a complicated series of amendments were negotiated between the Republican and Democratic forces to form the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former slaves, and guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws. But you have to remember here, as Cheryl said before, Native Americans were not considered citizens until 1924, so it didn't cover them. This was the first guarantee of due process. But unfortunately, this amendment also specified for the very first time that voters in the Constitution, that voters in the elections had to be male. As you might expect, this did not go over well with women who'd been working for suffrage for 2 decades. And it caused major turmoil within the suffrage forces. Their sex seemed to be being shunted aside once again. Within a year, the 15th Amendment, giving black men the vote, was proposed. And the question arose whether suffragists should support it or even work for its ratification, because many of the suffragists had come out of the abolition movement. And in the meantime, because of this discussion, as well as discussion as whether to go for a national amendment or stay with states, the suffrage main organization that had been a single one had split, and now it was in 2. The National Women's Suffrage Association, with Stanton and Anthony, refused to support the 15th Amendment, and they called for a 16th Amendment with universal suffrage. Frederick Douglass, the longtime suffrage supporter of us, broke with them over this, noting the lives of black men were at stake in the brutality of the black code enforcement, and they needed the vote for some semblance of equal power. The American Women's Suffrage Association, with Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe, supported ratification of the 15th Amendment, even if it meant women had to wait for the vote. Stanton and Anthony believed fervently that women should not have to wait, and they even began adopting arguments that affirmed a belief in black inferiority, or at least stated so. What a terrible problem this was for the women suffragists of color, who wanted their husbands and their sons and their fathers to be able to vote, whose very lives and family economics might well depend on the outcome and policy of a given election. Yes, universal suffrage sounds better, but not supporting the reality of a black male vote would hurt black families. And it was a tremendous, and they began adopting some arguments of white Democrats who opposed the 15th Amendment, and it did a tremendous disservice to people of color and to the suffrage movement. That this actually happened, can be seen in the articles of the newspaper that was part of the NWSA at the time, called The Revolution. And the articles that they included talking about black men and the vote would result in women being dominated by inferior men, and that immigrants in black were uneducated and unqualified to vote, while women of a certain class and privilege were qualified. Well, this hadn't necessarily been part of their arguments before, but it was part of what some of the Southerners who didn't want the 15th Amendment passed were saying. Ultimately, the 15th Amendment was ratified, and black men had the vote by 1870. Ultimately, what a problem this lack of vision became for the women's movement that suffered a huge lack of solidarity with our sisters of color, a lack of shared intersection, an intersection of experience at a crucial and difficult time. That denial of experience of diversity may even have become a factor in prolonging the period that followed, that took us so long to get the vote. Over the next few decades, political and economic conditions changed as a result of the negotiated agreements southern states got to implement their own laws. And civil and voting rights had more severe consequences like lynching and beatings and burnings and murder, which later became part of Klan and the Jim Crow scenario. But by the 1890s, we saw, because of the women's clubs in suffrage and in public life, and they were elected to leadership here. These women still saw the women's vote as a significant factor in moving their lives and the lives of their daughters forward, and they worked tirelessly to achieve it. So Ida B. Wells Barnett and Frances Harper and Mary Church Terrell and Harriet Tubman were all founders of this club and early president and officers. The political strategy changed from targeting state suffrage to national suffrage around the turn of the century, roughly from the 1890s on. And the major suffrage organizations wanted to pressure newly elected Democratic President Woodrow Wilson to call for and openly support a suffrage amendment. So in addition to meeting him, as they would always try to do, they decided they were going to have to do some picketing at the White House gates, and this became particularly significant. But first, they mobilized on March 3rd, 1913, the day before Inauguration Day. And the National American Women's Suffrage Association, with the collaboration of Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, organized a suffrage parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. And it was really large. When Wilson came into town that day before the inauguration, he wasn't met with hardly anybody. He says, "Where is everybody?" And they say, "They're all at the suffrage parade." As we heard earlier, Alice Paul did ask Ida B. Wells and all the black suffragists to march at the back. Wells refused and jumped in with her own state delegation of Illinois. Over 5,000 women marched in what was at first peaceful, but became chaotic as it was disrupted by thugs and onlookers whom the police did nothing to stop. In the aftermath, a Senate hearing following this police inaction gave the women publicity and suffrage national coverage. The suffragists proceeded with their strategy to picket at the gates of the White House. And they used banners, often using Wilson's own words on democracy to show just how hollow they were when they were applied to women. When they picketed, they were silent, and they just had their banners, and so they were called silent sentinels. When America joined World War I in April of 1917, Wilson and his government, which had been maintaining neutrality up to this point, began to pull out all the stops to get the country unified behind a war effort and for democracy and patriotism. The suffragists had a serious debate about whether to continue picketing because they worried they might be arrested for treason, but they decided to continue. They selected quotes which Wilson was using regarding the war, which paralleled how women needed the vote to be full citizens in their own democracy, and they continued picketing. As the picketing became more politically embarrassing, pressure built. The authorities cracked down on picketers, first arresting them on obviously trumped up and bogus charges like obstructing traffic, assigning them 6 months in the workhouse for non-payment of fines or repeated arrest. It was thought that this would break the picketers, that would be the end of this picketing at the White House gates. But there were always more women stepping forward, black women as well as white women, in solidarity to keep the picket going. And then Alice Paul was arrested. And she also was sent to the Occoquan workhouse. She was targeted for physical and mental examinations, which as a political prisoner, she felt she shouldn't have had to be. And so she went on a hunger strike in protest and was force-fed. Paul's declaring a hunger strike had the immediate result of all the others who were there also going on hunger strike. Information about the force feeding, about the rotten, wormy food, the hunger strike, and the terrible conditions got out to the newspapers and appalled people. It was even more embarrassing for the president and his authorities. Then on the night of November 14th, 15th, a large number of guards were sent on an attack of the incarcerated suffragists. The women were brutally beaten and thrown around, chained, choked, dragged about in the jail. And the event has since been referred to as the Night of Terror. Fortunately, nobody died, although one woman suffered a heart attack. The public was angered on their behalf as the word about that also got out to the press. And there was even more support for the suffrage amendment and the suffragists. 2 weeks later, they were all pardoned and released. Their solidarity with one another and with the suffrage movement paid off in a dramatic reversal. In January of 1918, Wilson announced that he now supported a suffrage amendment. According to the White House Historical Association, the gross mistreatment of suffragists gave them a moral high ground, one that President Wilson eventually felt compelled to join. As the United States projected the merits of democracy abroad in the war, its representatives now answered to citizens, both male and female, at home. And Wilson tried to justify this, saying, well, the women have helped so much in the war effort, they deserve to have the suffrage. The House narrowly passed the amendment proposed again by Jeanette Rankin, from Montana, who was the first woman ever elected to Congress. But the Senate didn't. In the meantime, suffragists continued their organizing. They didn't stop and just wait on this. And 3 more states had passed suffrage at the state level. In that fall, when elections were coming around, Alice Paul urged citizens to vote down anti-suffrage senators who were having a re-election struggle. And after those elections, many more members of Congress were pro-suffrage. In May and June of 1919, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, as it was called, passed both houses and went to the states for ratification, which needed 3/4 of the states. People wonder if individual action actually counts. So here's what happened. Suffragists shifted attention back to their respective states to help with the ratification, of course, petitioning their representatives relentlessly for the next year. Finally, they were down to needing just 1 more state, and Tennessee was that first opportunity. There was a ferocious effort, both by the pro-suffragists and the anti-suffragists. The yellow rose symbolized suffrage, and the red rose was used by the antis. The count showed suffrage forces down by 1 vote when the action of an individual changed things. Harry Byrne was a young legislator wearing a red rose, and he had already voted against suffrage once when a roll call vote was called for. In the meantime, he had received a letter from his mother, Phoebe Ensminger Byrne, who was a farmer and a suffrage supporter in Tennessee, and saying, among other things, she hoped he would be a good boy and help Mrs. Carrie Catt, who was the head of the National Women's Suffrage Association, put the rat in ratification. He, not wanting to disappoint his mother, changed his vote to suffrage and put the amendment over the top. An interesting side note on this ratification banner was that even the women of Hawaii, which was still a territory then, were allowed to have the vote. They gained the women's vote as a territory and had crafted a star of their own for the ratification banner. A single action, what one person does, may not seem at first to be able to make a difference, but it is the only thing that does. What each suffragist of color we heard about tonight did in her community, like founding schools, so many of them saw education as the major priority, starting newspapers like Ida B. Wells, going on speaking tours like Mary Church Terrell and others, created tremendous opportunities for social change. These women exercised political strategy, figuring out what they could do and how far they could push things at a given time, and a little further. They practiced solidarity with their communities, with their families, with other women of color, and with the white communities for the greater good where they could. They lived individual action with great courage. There are many more suffragists of color we need to learn about. There were some Native American women who were suffrage fighters, even though they weren't considered citizens. Today, we can all act as one of many whether it's a march like our January women's marches, where over 10,000 came out here in Olympia and thousands more around the world, or in day-to-day work in movements like environmental protection, whether it's climate change or clean water, and for LGBTQ rights. You must use your banner, your ballot, as we've heard over and over tonight, since we have one now. And you can stand in support when someone else needs it, whether it's immigrants at our border, or victims of violence like the missing and murdered Native women, or Black men and women, other women of color, who have seen the deadly side of force with even our law enforcement. However you do it, your action counts and is essential to a just society in which we can live and love and raise our children and our grandchildren together. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So now, we are going to close out, but I do want to acknowledge after we close out, we're going to get handouts as we are leaving, and those handouts are more information about the suffrage movement and also some, like Linda mentioned, like you can make a difference, political strategy, solidarity, and then we can each make a difference in our own communities, which this is our community. Thurston County is our community. So just be mindful of that, and be mindful of how you can like literally put your hand out there, or your foot out there, your whole entire being out there, just for just the mere fact of you representing your community and doing the right thing in our community. I say our community. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming. I thank you for our co-sponsors, hearing the voices of the suffragists of color, and like I said, packets are going to be ready before everyone takes off. And I want to say a big thank you for the Unitarian Universalist Congregation. The Unitarian Universalist Congregation for this comfortable facility and all the tech support. We thank you, Dorothy, for everything. Thank you, Dr. Carroll, for everything. We appreciate you always. And then the Thurston County National Organization for Women, Zonta of South Puget Sound, League of Women Voters of Thurston County, our speakers and performers. We thank you so much. Give it up for them. And that was the video we saw on Mary Hall, the video we saw on Katie Hall, Mary Hall, Dr. Karen Johnson, Linda Malinchuk-Finnan, me, Ava McGee, Talana Reed, Cheryl Wapessa Mays. Good. I don't like to mess anybody's name up. And Carolyn Wooding. And also the Suffrage Event Work Committee, including Liz, Linda, Sharon, Carolyn, Jennifer, Irene, Nancy, Sue, Sandra, Cheryl, and Talana. So thank you to the Washington Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservations for donating the sashes, and also for the site posters for our performers, and Helsing Junction Farm for our flowers. Is that a local farm? Awesome. Yeah. Oh, Rochester? That's cool. Yeah, so thank you. And remember, there's events on inside your program. And Carolyn has one more thing to close us out. All right. And I hope you guys enjoyed everything. I thank you for just showing up and just being a part of this event. And thank you, and see you on the next one.
Well, I come to you tonight as the spirit of Amelia Bloomer. As Amelia, I was at the 1848 First Women's Convention held in Seneca Falls, New York. And my claim to fame is that I published a newspaper that was devoted to women. And my circulation quadrupled once I started printing patterns for pants. I really promoted women being able to wear trousers for health and comfort. Now, if men had to be gussied up in corsets with stays, have multiple petticoats they had to walk around in, and dresses that were heavy going all the way to the ground, they would have advocated for change too. Of thanking tonight's sponsors, and I want to acknowledge that Thurston County Media is, Thurston Communications Media is filming this, and we'll have it posted later. The handout that we're going to give you in just a few minutes will have a lot of useful websites for you, and we hope that we will be able to post this on the sponsors' Facebook pages and websites as well, so that you can share the information with others. It's a great resource for teachers and youth group leaders. It wouldn't have happened without you being here tonight. You are a great audience, and we've prepared this handout for you to take with us. And remember, we have a little bouquets for our presenters and speakers of the yellow rose, which was the suffrage rose, and in Zonda we call it the rose of friendship. But it also has rosemary in here, which is the herb of remembrance, so we can keep that. Our work to empower women is not done. We need to focus our efforts on diversity, equity, and inclusion. A recent posting on the League of Women Voters site described it this way: diversity is being invited to the party. You're all invited. Equity is playing your music. And I think you've heard some familiar words here. And inclusion is being asked to dance. Let us dance together in our community and celebrate change as it happens. We can make a big difference when we join forces. We can end gender-based violence. We can ensure equitable and quality education and health access. We can promote economic empowerment. And we can ensure that full equality between women and men happens in public policy. We're standing on the shoulders of others who've gone before us, and there was a wonderful suffrage song performed at the 75th anniversary in Washington, D.C., and it was called Standing on the Shoulders. We'll post that one later too. But be sure and vote, and encourage everyone you know to vote intelligently and knowledgeably. The League of Women Voters has wonderful meetings every Tuesday morning at the Mud Bay Coffee Shop where they discuss issues. The League endorses issues, not candidates, and they do a great deal of study before they come out with any kind of recommendation. I strongly encourage you to attend any forums that they hold or to view the video voter guide on TC Media. So we're standing on the shoulders of others, and I invite you to stand up, speak up, act up, and vote.